I think a great example of one of the most inspiring projects that I've ever come across is Virunga National Park. What they've done there under Emmanuel de Merode has created these hydroelectric plants that provide subsidized electricity. They have brought in the middle of the jungle of a war-torn district that still has a dozen different militias running around it, attacking its rangers. They lost 200 men killed by militias in the last decade. And yet they've been able to do this. And the plan goes even further than this.
Today's episode features conservationist Kurt Steiner, inventor of the Ranger rifle. The Global Conservation Corps presents the Rhino Man podcast. I'm your host, John Jerko, and the lead producer and director of Rhino Man the movie. This podcast series is a way for me to interview top conservationists on the topics of rhinos, the poaching crisis, the importance of rangers, and community engagement, all as a way to create awareness around these issues and to promote our film. Rhino Man is a feature-length documentary about the courageous rangers who risk their lives every day to protect the rhinos. Rhino Man is now available for rental on Amazon, Apple, Google, and Vimeo. Visit rhinomanthemovie.org for more. Now let's jump into the conversation with Kurt Steiner. Welcome to the Rhino Man podcast, Kurt. It's a real honor to have you on here. I feel like we had a nice chat maybe a couple of years ago about our social impact campaign for the film, and you had some good advice, and it was nice chatting over Zoom. But actually here in South Africa, this is really the first in-person podcast I've been doing with video in Africa. So excited to have you on here.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, I feel honored.
Let's just start out with, if you're at a dinner party or something and someone's like, what do you do? What would you tell them?
By habit, I've tended to make it as boring as possible. Just say I'm in conservation and leave it at that. And if you push a bit further, then okay, specializing in law enforcement. But I've always tried to keep it low key and downplay it quite a bit.
What would you say your role is right now, or what are you doing day to day?
The best way to put it, I'd say conservation law enforcement consultant. So with all the previous organizations I worked for and now working independently, stability, security, and mostly law enforcement.
Yeah, and I want to dive into some of those specifics and really get into rangers with you as well. But can we just go back to how did you end up in Africa? Because you're from Australia originally, correct?
Correct, yeah. I think since I was a kid, I've always wanted to be in Africa. I've read as many books as I could, and histories, biographies, everything. And then I discharged from the army in 2008, came here at the start of 2009, originally doing some close protection work. And I found myself in the bush and absolutely loved it. And I decided I actually want to do this more often. I don't really like suits and cities so much. And yeah, just the bush work grew and grew, and each job got bigger and bigger. And it doesn't pay as well as other jobs, but quality of life, and I think the cause behind it all is a lot more fulfilling.
Yeah, I feel like that's a kind of a common theme. Not as great pay as you'd like, but you get the sunsets and
Absolutely
amazing wildlife and people, just so many amazing people in this.
Absolutely, yeah.
So can you kind of take yourself back to that moment of when you decided to come here? Was there anything in particular that drew you here, or what was that? Where did you land at first?
So I landed in Cape Town, and I had a very good friend in the army that roughly about the period I decided to come over here was killed. And his whole dream for many years had been to come over and do counter-poaching. And this is before the Rhino War started off, so it wasn't really that well known, but didn't have much public attention. So discharged, saved up some money, came here, and I thought, well, I really want to get involved in this. And I think I started work in the north of South Africa around Kruger, and I realized what a big problem this was, and it really had no attention, no real effort. There was very little training. It was really, really ad hoc and informal. And
yeah, can you talk about the state of the Rangers at that time and what you saw?
Absolutely. Well, the state, and it's still this way in many, many places, very minimal training. At least in South Africa, there is a security industry with set standards, and so firearms competencies, there's a fair bit there. And also almost every park manager had done their national service back in the old days. So there was at least an understanding of military methods, law enforcement, structured organizational skills. That was, to a degree, somewhat there. I think the priority, the importance of it wasn't apparent at the time. And from 2009 onwards, the rhino poaching just massively picked up. But when he started getting outside of South Africa, it was just almost non-existent. The first course I was helping to train with was in Tanzania. And then I was asked, can you go to Congo and we speak French? Can you run a BFR? Sure thing. What's a BFR? Basic Field Ranger course. And really, there's no doctrine, training manuals. There was absolutely nothing at the time. A few minor things have been written down in South Africa. Natal Parks Board had done some stuff, but beyond that, absolutely nothing. And a course was 3 weeks long. And I kept raising the point that 3 weeks is barely enough to... You can teach a guy to tie his boots and clean his weapon in that time. That's it. That's nothing. And I would draw the comparison in the West, in UK, US, Europe, Australia, anywhere. A policeman will undergo 3 to 6 months basic training and then further months of training. It takes years to really build this level of professionalism. And it's absolutely terrible to think that you can give a guy 3 weeks training and he's going to be absolutely fine. So ever since that point, every year we've added another week and built it up. And BFRs now, basic field ranger training, is anywhere between 8 to 12 weeks or longer.
Mm-hmm.
And you're giving the guys the skills they need to succeed. But at the time, geez, it was next to nothing.
I mean, was it pretty intense back then as well in terms of armed conflict and some things these guys had to run into?
Armed conflicts is one of the lower levels. In many places, like my specialty has mostly been Central Africa for the last 10 years. DRC, CAR, Congo, all the others. And there, it's horrendous. I mean, in some parts, you've got anywhere up to 8 different armed groups running around, all just trying to take on each other and the rangers. But one of the lesser recognized threats is the actual environment itself. We've got huge problems with gastro and waterborne diseases, malaria, food, all these things that guys weren't given the equipment to deal with that. So water purifiers. And you'd often hear this, people saying, park managers saying, oh, well, they live in the area, they don't have water purifiers at home, why should we provide that?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, just because the situation's shit doesn't mean we shouldn't try to improve it.
Yeah, exactly.
We've even had, I've heard of a park manager refusing to issue first aid equipment to the rangers.
Mm.
And their comment was, they're going to live or die regardless if they have first aid equipment. If you issue it to them, they're just going to ruin it and break it.
Wow.
I was like, how can you look at yourself in the mirror? Why are you even in this field if that's your opinion? Equipment was next to nothing. I've got some great photos back in the day. Guys would have one uniform, which naturally they would wear when they get back to base. So on patrol, the guys are in yellow T-shirts and grey sweatpants and anything they could find, and they'd have to buy themselves, often falling to pieces. Equipment's non-existent. It was really bad state of affairs.
Yeah. So I guess where did you go from? That was kind of the early start there. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, from your perspective, some of the things that you learned over time? Because you're coming from more of a military background, you're applying that to this conservation space. But how did that conservation space influence you in the way you started training or thinking about training or interacting with people out in the field?
I think that's a really good question because that's something that's been touched on a lot recently. I look back at some of the things I was doing 13 years ago. I think, oh my God, what was I thinking? And coming from a military background, I'm trying to apply a lot of those lessons and it just doesn't fit. It's this niche area in between police work, what is domestic policing work, but in a bush environment. I think the biggest advantage that I had was always learning. I'm a nerd for these things. I'm just an information sponge. Every single park I went to, and I calculated last year, it's almost 50 parks in about 20 countries that I've worked in and been around. And everywhere I went, I'd just be collecting best practices. I think the first time in Congo Brazza, it was just back-to-back patrols, 10-day patrol, come back, 1 night resupply, 8-day patrol, come back, resupply. And I did that for 3 months straight and lost over 30 kilos. So I was just broken. But every single day on patrol, every night sitting down, while I'd be sitting on the side of the road in northern Congo for 2 days in a hut waiting for a vehicle. And I just had my little books and I just keep writing notes, questioning everyone and collecting all these best practices. So after a few years of this, I think at the end of 2014, I was approached by African Parks. And I had done some training for them in previous years. And they were in a position where every single park was doing something slightly different. There was very little coordination. There was no guiding doctrine behind it all. So they asked me to create a law enforcement department at head office and structure things. And that's where all the collection of best practices over the years really, really came in. We're not teaching particularly military skills. Bushcraft is what anyone working out in remote areas can do. First aid is the same. But a lot of them are, such as, let's say, a lot of the first aid, you're dealing with ballistic injuries, gunshot wounds, and the like. So finding that merger between domestic policing skills and military skills, and more often than not, actually bringing in a huge amount of survival skills, navigation, bushcraft, and what have you. So, yeah, it's just finding that really great combination of all those skills.
Yeah, it seems like from what I've learned from talking to quite a few people in this space too, is a lot of these rangers didn't really come into these as crime scenes, and so there was a lack of collection of evidence and things like that, which really didn't help them out when it came to the court cases against some of these poachers and them kind of getting back out there. I don't know. Did you kind of get involved in that aspect of it as well?
It is, and it's still a very, very big problem
Yeah.
because, okay, you've gone to all the effort of patrolling this area, catching the guy, preventing the act, or trying to catch him after the act, and then it all accounts for nothing if you take him straight to the courthouse and they throw him out on a technicality immediately. I think Kruger had some figures where I think they were catching guys on average on their 14th incursion.
Yeah, that's crazy.
14 times they've been in and out of the park killing rhino by the time they're caught. And every time they're caught, they're released almost immediately on, what equivalent of a $20 bail.
Mm.
So it's incredibly demoralizing and heartbreaking for the guys. So working proper crime scene investigation, maintenance of that crime scene, recording of evidence chains, all these things to be able to secure a conviction are massively important. And they have been improving a lot over the years, but the environment itself doesn't help. You might be days away from base. So securing that evidence, recording it well, there's a lot of difficulties in it.
I mean, do you have any theories on why this space with rangers has been so neglected over the years? I mean, it seems like a lot of people like yourself are starting to upskill, create, um, best practices and things like that. But it seems like, these guys are just kind of out there, and then they're dealing with not only monitoring wildlife and protecting the park, but in some cases running into pretty rough and tough people as well. Yeah, I don't know. It just seems like that whole space was kind of neglected.
And historically it was. And you can look at this in terms of in Africa in general, and it's not a homogenous single country, but across the board, you've got countries with huge problems. They've got to work on healthcare, education, roads, infrastructure, policing. So in all these countries, conservation has often been the lowest priority of everything. And that just honestly is fair enough. You can't really say to a country, hey, forget about gender-based violence and forget about education. You should be putting all your money towards protecting these animals. It's a very difficult priority for them. So in terms of that, how that flows on to the conservation departments, the guys historically were often there. It was the job they could get. There wasn't very few actually joined because they have a huge love for wildlife. And honestly, why should they? Elephants, animals, buffalo will come out, eat their crops, injure their family members. There's no reason for them really to have a huge amount of love for it. They're not going on photographic safari tours. So it was a job, and traditionally it was a very low priority job. My final article from a PhD that I'm currently doing in criminology is diving into how has this evolved over time. And I think the guys in Virunga had a great observation that 20, 35 years ago, it was the average age of a ranger in that area was in his 50s. He had zero education, was often illiterate. They weren't paid well, they weren't equipped well. And the current ranger in Virunga is averaging around 28 years old. He has matriculation, often maybe one or two other diplomas that the park pays for and helps him to get. The training is extensive and extremely, extremely good. They're equipped well. So the priorities have increased. People are taking more care, but very different from previous decades.
So it's becoming a profession that people actually feel proud to be a part of and see it as a career where they can advance versus just a job that out of desperation.
That's exactly right, because up until then, you'd be a ranger in the one role, the one position for your entire career, 20 years. There was no progression, there was nowhere to advance to. And guys like the Wildlife College, who I think you'll see next, they've done amazing work in actually building in skills, courses, career progression paths where guys can promote and advance. And after years, maybe transfer across, become a guide, become a tourism manager, work in a workshop. They can do anything. So there is a huge change in that. There's more investment in the rangers themselves.
Yeah, I mean that seems extremely important, especially looking to the future where, we still don't have really enough rangers to effectively manage all the spaces we're trying to manage. And if you want people to, especially in a day and age where there's all this, you can work almost anywhere virtually, and more and more connectivity is coming to a lot of these places in Africa and other places around the world. So to have a career path that people actually want to pursue, and hopefully more and more out of passion as well, but you need to see something more than just a love for it. You need to see an ability to support a family and to feel like you're using yourself fully and grow in that way. So it's exciting to see programs like the Wildlife College. I spent quite a bit of time there following that for the film and some other projects, and even things as basic as I was kind of amazed that they're teaching things like taking care of your finances and stuff that's more just personal growth, so that people are better able to manage their lives while they're also pursuing this career.
And these are great skills. I know of a couple of parks now that have invested in building up ranger wellness, as they call it. So, in building a gym at the camp headquarters, bringing physical training instructors over to train up local instructors who can now run PT courses. I hate to joke about it, it's almost the growth of CrossFit. People are investing in that. I know of a couple of parks who've reworked their incentives programs. So they meet a particular target during the month or meet their key performance indicators. There's a certain, if you want to take a cash reward incentive, which is discouraged, but you can do that. But if you want to put it towards something else, like if you want to put it towards the purchase of a car or school fees for your children, then the park will double that amount. So historically, again, you'd see guys get their incentive, and I'm not saying this about rangers. I'm myself as well as a digger, as a grunt. So you get your cash, you blow it, you get on the piss, and and you just have a party. And what they're trying to encourage now is ways that if you want to do that, we're not saying you shouldn't. We're not judging on this. Like if you want to do that, hey, your life. But if you want to put it towards other things, if you want to put it towards your family and education, your children, then we will double that, and we will help build a life around you.
Yeah, it's that positive reinforcement that helps direct people.
Exactly, and there's some great advances being made there.
I mean, we've been talking about rangers already, but to you, what's the importance of rangers? And maybe even when you first got to Africa, are there any stories of meeting some of these guys and gals and just seeing how they, how they're sacrificing themselves out in the field to do this type of work? Is there anything that connected to you? Like, why are they important to you, I guess, essentially?
I suppose one of the first jobs I was doing around Kruger, and I had a Zulu tracker, a very short, small guy, uncharacteristically, called Dumzani. And this man was an absolute machine. He's one of the most incredible trackers that he could track a fart in the wind, that's what they used to say. He was insanely good. And he had his throat cut from here to here years earlier because one of the syndicates had caught up with him in his home village.
Jeez.
He had put so many guys behind bars. As this tiny little unassuming guy and was always unarmed. He had a little stick. That was it. And we had some guys come in, a private security company, to help get all the rangers their firearms competencies and bring them into line with South African regulations. And these guys were city guys. They do cash and transit protection, and they're very tactical. Had all the right clothes and the right contractor's cap, and very, you see that type around a lot. And when they saw Dumzani, they're asking, like, oh, you don't have your weapons competency? He said, no. And they were incredulous. Like, well, what the hell? How could you never have a weapons competency? And he just calmly looked at the biggest guy and says, I've never needed one. Just put him in his place instantly.
Love that kind of confidence.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess, on top of that story, what would you say the importance of rangers are to these protected areas for someone that doesn't know? I mean, we've talked about this a lot on this podcast, but I always love hearing someone's perspective.
One way to put it, I'd say you have a lot of these animals represent, just think of them as a bag of gold coins, an elephant or a buffalo or a rhino in particular. You have this massive amount of wealth sitting in the middle of a park, and without any protection whatsoever, it's going to be taken. And what we're seeing over time, I can actually clarify this a bit better. The lower scale stuff, subsistence poaching, snaring some antelope or something, no one really cares about that too much. It's a danger, sure, and snares indiscriminate killers, and we sweep them out, but they generally get a slap on the wrist. If it's seen as just subsistence survival poaching, then that's not a great big concern. The concern is your high value species being taken. And those are almost every single one of them is from outsiders. It's not guys in your surrounding villages that are coming in, because it's a very specific set of skills. Access to a high powered rifle, knowing points of aim where to shoot, being able to track at night, having the contacts to move the contraband onwards. It's a very small subset of people that have all those skills and abilities. Those are the priorities that people are trying to get. Without rangers on the ground, you've just left your house unlocked with $1 million sitting on the dinner table. It's going to go missing.
Yeah, I mean that brings up another topic that you hear every once in a while is the green militarization, and it's kind of going back again to people coming in from other countries, from special forces and things like that, and training and maybe just not doing it the right way. But there's the argument that all these resources that are being put towards militarizing rangers should be put maybe in other places. But I guess, and I'll let you kind of answer this yourself, but if you take all the rangers out right now with their skills and their weapons to protect, then the species, because of some of these people coming in from the outside, are going to be around for many months.
Precisely, and it's a huge hot topic at the moment, and which I find particularly troublesome. All the articles, all the news, and all the media stuff out there about militarization, it's all being written by people who've never been in the military, have never been rangers, never worked in law enforcement. And the arguments they use to justify this narrative are pointless. So, they're using military technology. Well, everything's military technology. Tinned food and the internet is military technology. Everything was developed. So that's a rather ridiculous one. They're using military technology such as drones. So I still, to this day, have not seen a single park successfully use a drone for counter-poaching. They do have other uses, and they will get there in many years to come, but they're not there yet. So no, that's not working. They're teaching military skills, such as basically what we're seeing is the professionalization of rangers. And there's probably been 4 or 5 decades worth of research that's gone into police militarization in the US. And what they've all come down to is policing, domestic policing, law enforcement itself is a function of the state's ability to use force to ensure coercion. Basically, this is wrong. You're not allowed to do it. And if you do it, we're going to arrest you. We're going to use force. We're going to forcefully take you. So the big question is not whether it's being militarized or not. It is militarized to a degree. It's an extension of the state's ability to use force. The question is it proportionate?
Yeah.
That is the biggest question I think we have in conservation. Guys are running around with AKs. Well, the guys coming in have AKs. You're not going to send them out with a can of pepper spray facing 8 LRA rebels. That's not proportionate. And also, you have a duty of care to your own people. We want, as a society, we want our rangers out there protecting our conservation real estate. Okay, we have a duty of care to them, but we're sending them out there. They must be able to defend themselves. So for me, it all comes down to proportionality.
Yeah, and I think, we can dive more into training too, but really it comes to a well-trained ranger is someone who's going to be able to protect themselves and their team, but also, proceed in the right manner to de-escalate situations versus, just start firing a gun just out of fear or something like that. So I feel like that training is extremely important, and maybe you can dive into some of the work you've done in the training side that you feel has really had an impact.
Well, as you say, the training is the highest priority of all of this, and well-trained guys do de-escalate it. There's countless stories in previous years when there was zero training at all. The only resort was to start shooting indiscriminately. And now with training, you have a whole range of skills to lead up to that in your continuum of force. So your sheer presence alone starts off with de-escalating a lot of things. Beyond that, verbal commands, now you can actually subdue or restrain a person without having to resort to lethal force. So the more trained a person is, then the less likely it is that that force will be abused. So straight away, the professionalization of the ranger cadre across Africa is a massive de-escalation in itself. Probably what we do see, those the first aid training especially has the largest flow-on benefit. I mean, in almost every ranger you speak to, a few of them, not many, but a few of them will have used those skills in the park, on the job. But a lot more of them, almost all of them, have used them back at home. We've had guys, I think one of the most recent courses, literally 2 days after they finish their training and they have a week's worth of leave, There was a guy doing his own electrical wiring on the house and electrocuted himself. The recruit who had just passed his training, came out, was giving him CPR, resuscitated the guy, whereas before that, he wouldn't have had a clue what to do. So there's a lot of flow on benefits that accrue from that. And sorry, I forgot your earlier question.
No, I mean it was all just kind of related to the training side, and just to add to that, I mean I spoke with our mutual friend Boris, and he was just telling me from their work at Lead Ranger, teaching some of those first aid skills, all these amazing results with rangers helping people in the communities, like you just said, which also creates a better connection and bond between the communities and the rangers, because there's, a lot of times it's almost an adversarial, seen as an adversarial role, because if they're subsistence poaching or coming into the park to get things and the rangers are, doing law enforcement and arresting them or pushing them out, they're kind of seen as the bad guy sometimes, but these skills allow them to also help people at home. So I don't know if you've seen any of that.
I have, and one big change, part of the evolution we've seen in the last, let's say the last decade, is away from the concept of securing a certain area and screw everybody and kick everyone out and just attack. You still get that to a certain degree in the South, Southern Africa, to a degree, but even that's changed a lot. The model that I'm seeing grow more and more and become more and more common is, let's say, 80% soft power, 20% hard power. The 80% is the majority of your rangers out there in the buffer zones, bordering on communities, helping with human-wildlife conflict. They're engaging with them constantly. And the 20% hard power, when you do have information that this guy has a weapon under his bed, or this guy's just killed some elephant, has the ivory in his car, that's when you go in forcefully and you use the hard power. But the majority of your efforts are in soft power. You're engaging. This isn't a military invasion, it's domestic law enforcement. And that happens with the consent of the people. If you don't have the people on side, if you're not engaging with them, then you're doomed before you even start.
Has that been a part of the training that you've helped develop over the years, is kind of this community engagement aspect of it? Because I mean, rangers, especially the more well-trained, on the law enforcement side, but even on the conservation side, they become often the advocates for the park and can be, sometimes giving talks at schools or, like you said, helping with human wildlife conflict. And so I didn't know if that's a part of the strategy and the training.
It is. It's one of the soft strategies. During training, the guys will be taught communication skills, how to de-escalate situations, how to talk to people, showing respect. And that comes across in their dealings and interactions with the communities. But more than that, rangers are of the communities that they're around and they serve. In many places, in CAR, for example, rangers, it's the largest tax-paying sector in the entire nation. It's one of the largest employers in the region, is guys being rangers. They go back to their village, they spend their money in their communities. And there's lots of different estimates on this, but between 5 and 8 further people benefit from one single ranger's job. He's now buying supplies and he's building a house for his family. He's sending his kids to school. The flow and effect from one single ranger and his employment and salary benefits a huge amount of people.
Yeah, I think people from like the US and Europe or other places outside of Africa, Asia, often don't realize how many people one person is supporting with their salary. And it's, South Africa, it's the same. Often it's, 5 to 10 to plus individuals, close family and then extended family, and they're all relying on this salary from this person. And so, I mean, I don't know how involved you've been on that side of things, just trying to encourage these organizations and governments to raise those standards in terms of pay and healthcare and life insurance. I don't know, maybe you can talk to that.
That's, I think, one of the greatest things African parks ever did, and there's a huge amount of amazing benefits and the precedents that they set, that this is the way things should be run. But the per diems that they pay, the guys draw a government salary, which is next to nothing. So let's say $50 a month in some countries. It's absolutely nothing. And AP then boosts that up. So now adds on a couple of $100 on top of that per month for their salaries. Beyond that, they also have the knowledge that you have a full-time job. You actually have a leave cycle. You can plan your life around it. You can plan your finances around this. And African Parks also instituted, I think about 6 or 7 years ago now, an insurance scheme. So you've got health insurance, you have hospital access, but beyond that, it's also life insurance. If a ranger is killed, I think it's over 6 times his annual salary is paid out in tranches or as a lump sum to his family. This is benefits that were never ever heard of before, and never existed before. They're finally doing this. It's becoming, I think African Parks does it, Frankfurt Zoological now does it, WCS does it. All your main NGOs do this. And now it's grown to a stage where it's now become de rigueur, it's become accepted. It's no longer an isolated anomaly. It's like, this should be the way it should be done.
Someone needs to set the standard
Exactly.
so that people can push up to that.
Yeah, we're asking these guys to go out in incredibly hard conditions, risk their lives. It is one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. We need to look after them.
And at the same time, resist being turned to the poacher side with, potentially high, financial rewards. If you don't have any of these, you have low pay and you don't have any kind of health insurance, like you're thinking about your family, it's easier to turn people as well. So,
and if you don't have that esprit de corps, if you don't have that loyalty and love of the organization you're with and your park, it's and it's all maybe a little bit Hallmark movie-ish, but it is, when you treat the guys well, when you treat people as human beings, they tend to respect that. I know it's an amazing concept.
Crazy concept.
Look after your people, they will look after you.
And now for a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is sponsored by Wildlife & Co. Wildlife & Co. is on a mission to protect Earth's ecosystems and wildlife. They do this by partnering with artists to create unique, high-quality, fair trade apparel. For the release of Rhino Man, they've created a special run of custom t-shirts and hoodies, featuring a limited edition rhino designed by Kyle LeBlanc. Sales will go toward benefiting the projects of Rhino Man and GCC. So make sure to check them out on Instagram and get some cool apparel that supports the cause at wildlifeandco.com. And now back to the show. I think I came across the anti-poaching training guidelines, which you helped put together. And in there was a little section about, was it poachers to protectors? And I think that was through African Parks Network as well. I don't know if you can talk to that at all, or just the concept of ways to get poachers to kind of change their ways and come over to being a ranger supporting conservation.
So the Poachers to Protectors program, which has been reiterated in a few places, it was originally set up for the first time in Odzala in Republic of Congo. And I think AP had moved in, and I'd spent the first 2 years on and off there helping train and build things up. And it became accepted that this group is here to stay. And holy shit, this is actually a really good job. So the applications for a selection for training were massive. And the park manager at the time had this idea. I said, well, let's offer this now. We know there's poachers out there, and they're not doing it because they're hardcore poachers. And few kids, go to school and one day I'm going to be a poacher.
Yeah.
It's something you fall into. It's a form of crime.
Mm-hmm.
So he put it out there that any former poachers, what we want is, if you guys write a statement detailing your previous crimes and accessories and who else was helping you, then that becomes your entry ticket. You can now attend selection, and we will bring you in, and you'll be encouraged in this. And I think about 60 guys ended up passing out of hundreds.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
But also from the statements made, people renouncing their previous work. A lot of previous crimes were solved. Weapons were recovered. Ivory was recovered. It was a massive benefit all around. And these guys, these poachers, they know the trails in and out. They know who the people are. There's nothing better than a turned criminal who knows all the ins and outs of it. So with that program was responsible for a huge amount of successes.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive because, like you said, it's they understand the methods and how people are doing, so they can think like a poacher because they have been. So
and I'll be out on patrol with these guys and taking notes. And we found let's say some drying racks. It's very common in Congo. Rather than taking the meat out, they build a rack, a fire underneath, and smoke the meat. And their knowledge, okay, so if an elephant is killed in this region, close to this road, then what they'll do, they'll take the ivory, they'll leave the carcass, they'll run out. The ivory is normally chopped up into smaller bits and put into suitcases, and it's smuggled out in the buses going south to the capital. But north of this imaginary line of the park, there's less people, there's less roads, well, there are no roads. So they'll spend probably a week camping next to the carcass, drying all the meat. The ivory will be sent out north into Cameroon or elsewhere in whole piece. We're able to develop all these TTPs, these techniques, tactics, and procedures that the poachers were doing. And by having these turned poachers, our level of knowledge of what they can do and what they're likely to do, it just grew exponentially.
Yeah, I feel like that's a program that definitely could be used to be replicated in other areas.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like you said, most of these folks are just trying to make a living and survive, and it's not that they really want to be a criminal.
Yeah.
No one really wants to be a criminal.
I've often heard the statement, I've got 10,000 people living around my park. There's potentially 10,000 poachers. And I just don't get that. So in my latest article, I've just been digging into this a lot more. And every single park manager I've interviewed and everyone I've worked with and every law enforcement guy I know, if you've got 10,000 people around your park, why aren't they all coming in to poach? Okay, let's dig into that a little bit. Of 10,000 people, let's say 5,000 now are males, and it's almost exclusively males doing your high value poaching. Of those of actual age between, let's say, 15 and 60, they have the skills to come in, the number gets really, really small. And when you're talking high value poaching in a community of 10,000 people, you may have between 3 and 5 guys that possess the skills, the ability, and the willpower to travel multiple kilometers into a park, track animals, shoot them, get them out. It's very small. And if we can coerce those people to join us and change sides, well, we've solved half the problem already.
Yeah, I mean, you could also look at it as potentially 10,000 advocates for the park if you treat the community the right way and get them involved and they see benefit. So
That's a hard one. I mean, everyone should benefit from it. But I mean, let's talk around Kruger. We've got like 7 million people in Bushbuck Ridge, Aikenhook. Not everyone is going to benefit from a park. And yeah, it's a really difficult problem to solve that I don't think anyone has the answer to yet. You want as many people as possible to benefit. You want them to have a good association with the park, with the protected area. But there just isn't enough to go around to everyone. So
you can't disperse funds to 7 million people
yeah,
from the national park. It's just
yeah.
not possible.
What you can do is be less of an asshole.
Yeah.
Improve your relations with the communities.
And give more access and include them and make it something
Yeah.
they can be proud of as like kind of a centerpiece of their community.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, we were talking about some of that training or turning these poachers into rangers, and you mentioned selection. Could you talk a little bit about selection process and how you've seen them run or how you've run them over the years? Our film Rhino Man covers a selection that Ruben DeCock and Marion DeCock take some candidates through. And sometimes I hear people when they see it, they're like, "Oh, this is really intense. Like, is it really necessary to make these guys go through something that's so physical and mentally, rigorous to get this job as a Rangers?"
There's a lot of sayings that cover this, and I think they all boil down to tears in training saves you from blood in the field. The harder you train, then the better it is going to be when you're actually working. And selection is designed exactly for that. We want to start a course with those who are most likely and most able to finish that course. So if we have best, let's say 20 to 30 people on a course, which is a standard number, beyond that becomes a bit unmanageable and you need more instructors. So let's say 30 people on a course, you might go through hundreds before in selection. We want guys that have the mental strength to be able to carry on and finish this course. So selection, when I first started over here, guys, if they even ran one, it might be 2 days. And anyone can suck it up and gut it out for a couple of days. What you're not seeing is their abilities to work with each other. When things are really under stress, when things are really pushing them, how are they going to react? How are they going to react to that situation? How are they going to work with their colleagues? So a selection, let's say an average would be 10 days. And during that time, we're whittling it down. And it's not just physical. Physical strength you can build up over time. It's all about internal integrity, honesty, strength of character. That's what we want to see in this. One of my favorite methods would be we use the time, and in previous years, it's how we ran it. We would use that selection period to build the training camp because every single time we're in a different location of the bush. So they would be clearing out a shooting range and they would be building the huts to be living in and so forth. So you would give the guys, break them into groups of 5, 6 guys and set them off on a task unsupervised, or so they think. Then an hour later, you sneak back, get your binos out, and you're having a look, and you're seeing who's working, who's encouraging their teammates, and who's taking a sleep under the tree and saying, screw everyone. With that, we start to get an idea of their character. We had a good example, like the last day or two is always the hardest part, and you'll have maybe 2 or 3 days without sleep, multiple exercises, stretcher carries, stores carry. We're just really trying to see what is their breaking point. And one of the exercises that I think even Ruben did as well, that I think he probably came up with it, is a half-filled 44-gallon drum. So you're given a barrel half full of water, some rope and 2 poles. And this group now has to figure out a plan to make a stretcher to carry this. And the sloshing water It's a nightmare. It's bloody horrible. But we had one of the selections we did in Congo. We had this exercise. The guys had finished their pack march, finished all the different parts of it. Then they get to the stores carrier. They get to this part.
Is this kind
And
of a surprise too when they get
oh
to it?
yeah,
Like
that
this
they
is
don't know anything that's happening.
yeah.
Everything's just thrown at them. So we got to this part of the exercise. This one group comes up, it's their turn. They finish the pack march. Now here's the stores. Explain the task to them. And they did it. They were a little bit confused. They went 100 meters. And one guy said, "Is this for real?" He says, "Yeah." He said, "I'm out." Just quit on the spot.
Wow.
In reality, there was less than a kilometer to go.
Mm.
But we want to see where they're going to break. So that's hugely important. And it stands in stark contrast. We had Congolese special forces help out with some training probably about 8 years ago. And it was a requirement from the government. But their techniques were, the way they ran selection was something that happened in the Second World War. No one has done it ever since then. Their opinion was, we can change a person's character, but we can't change physical fitness.
Mm.
And I said, well, no, you're going to end up with a bunch of really strong idiots. So what they started off, and their selection was 1 day, and they absolutely beat the crap out of these guys. It was like, you've got to stop this. No, still
It's
carry on
almost
doing
torturous, huh?
that. Precisely. And they started the training course for that with about 60 guys. They finished 2 months later with, I think, 18 left. So along the way, he said, you're losing these guys that should have been dismissed during selection. But worse than that, you've now trained a bunch of potential poachers what the tactics and skills are of a ranger. So you've taken these guys, given them weapon skills, taught them the bush, and now they're gone off on their merry way. This is not the way we should be doing things.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, can you talk about, I guess, maybe some more examples of seeing people break? What's that kind of like? And then also, on the other hand, when I feel like I've seen this, when there's kind of that switch, maybe midway through, when people start to say, "Oh, I think I could do this," and even start to maybe for the first time realize that they've been challenged and they're overcoming that challenge, and that kind of switch that goes off in their head.
That's that side of things when a guy changes and realizes what he's capable of is the best part of training. We had a guy in Tanzania that we nicknamed Hatari, which is Swahili for dangerous or danger, because every time he touched an AK, he would almost start convulsing and shaking, and it was an absolute danger to anyone around him. And it took weeks to break that down. We found out he had been a previous poacher, but not a very successful one. And every time he got caught, the local police would be just beating him with their AKs. So he had this association. When he saw an AK, he was just having PTSD flashbacks. So to break through that and help him develop beyond that fear was a huge moment. And some of the guys, we had one of the guys in Congo was the oldest recruit I think we had. And this is where personal strength isn't the greatest thing. It helps, but character and integrity is far, far stronger. And this old guy, his nickname was General. And I eventually dug into why does everyone call him General? And in a previous civil war period in Congo, about 20 years earlier, he was an old guy. And he'd been a ranger the entire time, his entire life. In a previous, the guys were in a contact, and one of the dudes was wounded. And this guy, the general, he was hit in the leg. For 3 days, he bandaged up his own wound, and he carried this guy out of the jungle for 3 days. The guy survived. General was left with a permanent limp in his leg, so we excused him from running and certain tasks, just because his skills and his knowledge and his integrity, the loyalty that he inspired in people was just, out of this world.
Yeah, that's always something that's amazing to see too, is when you do see those people that start taking leadership roles on their own and really encouraging other people around them to keep pushing. Maybe someone's ready to give up and they're like, "No, you've got this." And yeah, it's just that's pretty special.
Yeah, that's what we're always watching for. The selection methods that we prefer is during selection, there is zero encouragement, there's zero discouragement. We're not yelling at anyone, we're not beasting them, we're not
From the instructors.
from the instructors. All we're doing is giving them the task in a flat, monotone style, and we're watching and just see what the character is. That's what we want to see out of them. When we get to training, now that changes. Now that's the next level above. It's almost like a miniature graduation. Now we're there, we want to build these guys up. And when you see, it's normally the halfway point, and even towards the end, when you see these guys step up and start realizing what they're capable of, it's an amazing thing.
Yeah, and I feel like, I wish there were more opportunities like that in life, because I feel like, especially in the modern world, people don't really get challenged in that way. We're all so comfortable all the time, and And I think we need that. We need something to push us to really see that, oh, we're more capable than we realize.
Yeah.
And yeah, just when you see this type of training, it really brings that to the foreground.
Well, it's the perspective, and it helps to be a little bit optimistic. Have a balance between pessimism and optimism. But you can compare any situation you're going through. And go, well, it's not as bad as training, or it's not as bad as this.
Yeah.
That's probably those first 3 months in Congo was probably one of the worst periods of my life. Just I was that sick, almost to about 48 kilos. I was a skeleton on legs, and halfway through those patrols, I got to a stage where I couldn't even pick up my own pack. The guys had to pick up the pack and put it on me, and then I'll just keep on staggering on. But at the same time, you're like, well, I'm not going to be that guy that quits. And we've all had those periods in the past. I have as well. I've quit things in the past and regret it to this day. So with that perspective, you're like, no, let's just push on through. There's another step, another step. No matter how bad it is, you look back and say, well, it's not as bad as this. It's raining, the food's shit, you've got dysentery. Well, it could be worse.
Yeah, it could always be worse.
Yeah.
What kept you going in those moments when you were going through that period? I mean, that sounds like a pretty brutal 3 months.
Oh, yeah. The halfway through, I was on a resupply back at the headquarters, and in the morning we have flag ceremony. Everyone's at attention, raise the flag, salute, sing the anthem, and then dismiss. And I turned right, took 3 steps, vomited everywhere, and then passed out. And I woke up 3 or 4 hours later on the patio of the park manager's house. And I think I was due to head off on the next patrol. And on this park in particular, there's no roads in the entire park. It's mountains and rivers and jungle. So it was 3 days by canoe to head up to the infiltration point for the next patrol. So I said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll put the deck chair in the canoe. And for those 3 days, I'm just going to rest and recover. I'm just going to read a book and and if I don't feel well enough, I'm not going to step out on patrol. I will come back with this canoe. Everyone knowing full well, you're not going to do that. You're not going to be that guy that comes back.
Yeah.
You just have to do it. So part of it as well is there's the desire, misguided perhaps, you want to set an example. You don't want to be that guy that comes back while everyone else is doing it. And every one of us has been in that situation once, and it feels terrible. So you make a vow to yourself, I'm not doing that again. No matter how bad it is, it's still better than feeling like that. So carry on.
Yeah, I feel like I can identify with that feeling because, I mean, kind of in my younger days, there's a lot of projects I had that I felt like I was taking them somewhere, and then for whatever reason, either chickened out or lost the commitment to it. And like you said, you kind of regret that. And honestly, with this film and this project, Rhino Man, I feel like it's the other side. I'm like pushing myself to the edge, but even, I think that for me, the film and the project, there's a huge purpose and cause behind it, and I care about that. But even more like internally, like I don't know, spiritually to some degree, I feel like I need to make sure I give it my best to the very, very end. Otherwise, won't be able to live with myself. So
We all have a regret from some point, and in those wee hours in the morning, and you think about it, you're like, oh shit. So like you're saying, we all have that feeling, and we just push ourselves harder. So we don't, no matter how bad it is, it's better than that feeling.
Yeah, exactly. The pain will pass, but the regret lives forever.
That's a very good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of jumping around a little bit, it was kind of interesting. I think Ruben told me about this first when we were chatting about you some time ago, and it's this Ranger rifle. And I think when Ruben was talking about it, I didn't fully understand the reasoning behind it, but maybe you can go into why you've been developing this rifle and the importance of having these alternative weapons for these Rangers.
Yeah. Well, I think it started in about 2017. The problem we have is a lot of parks, a lot of countries prohibit semi-automatic weapons, even for their own park staff. So what do? We know that we're losing, I think in the last 16 years, 2,500 rangers killed. Of those, a massive percentage is homicides from armed criminals. And the other major cause of death is dangerous game. That's animals themselves killing the rangers that are there to protect them. They don't know any better. So 2017, I was asked by a group, said, what weapons should we get? We need weapons. We've got 100 guys who are unarmed. We've had 4 rangers killed by poachers because they couldn't defend themselves. We either have to stop everything and basically not even patrol this ground, or we have to protect our people.
And this was a place where you couldn't have semi-automatic weapons?
Correct. And
Yeah.
so, well, they can, but it's very politically difficult. It draws a lot of attention. And they said also, technically, the threat, we've lost guys, but it's not at that level where we're in massive pitched battles. So what should we get? And up until then, guys often get shotguns. And I was always curious about this. Does this actually work in this context? So I started digging into it and pulling up all the research I could find, interviewing, chatting to everyone I could. There's a lot of scientific data out of the US, fortunately, from health services and from the police services. And anything beyond a few meters, shotguns are really not accurate. They lack the penetration ability beyond 20 meters. They have a spread of pellets that can now injure unarmed people on either side.
Would they be using buckshot typically, or something of that nature, like double-out buck? Or
Correct, if you can get it.
Yeah.
We've got, Nyasa is a great example of that. You've got one rifle, one shotgun for every 5 rangers. You've got an ISIS-linked, Al-Shabaab-linked Islamic insurgency in the area that is sweeping into the park, and you have 1 ranger in 5 armed with birdshot.
Oof. Yeah.
It's suicidal. So for all these reasons, we're looking through, and shotguns are actually a terrible, terrible idea in the bush. And I say that with a caveat. In an urban situation, within very short range, there's probably nothing better. But when you're looking 20 meters, 30, 40 meters, it's got too many moving parts. It's got the ammunition's inaccurate. It spreads. It doesn't penetrate. Everything about it's wrong. So what is the solution? Okay, we need a bolt action. We can't get semi-autos. Shotguns aren't right. So, okay, what do we want out of a bolt action? And there's a legendary firearms instructor in the US years ago called Colonel Jeff Cooper. He's passed away, I think, maybe 10, 20 years ago. And he came up with the idea of a scout rifle. And that's something it's a general purpose rifle that can fulfill 95% of tasks. It's got to be light. It's got to be short length. It's got to have detachable magazines for quick reloads. It's got to have have all these different features. Okay, let's look at that. And then we went a bit further and said, well, what does a ranger need? Law enforcement specifically. The guys often have to share their rifles. So we need an adjustable stock so it can be changed between users. We need to mount accessories sometimes. We need to mount a torch for night operations, maybe an IR designator for use with night vision. Okay, we need to be able to mount those accessories. We need to be able to suppress the muzzle flash. We can't have the guys giving away their positions. And out of this grew the Ranger rifle, which doesn't actually exist in anywhere. We had to build this. I went to a range of different firearms manufacturers. Some guys weren't willing to change their designs to add in the features that we needed. We spoke to some people about making it from scratch. One company started, and then they also defrauded a whole bunch of parks in orders, and they eventually went bankrupt. Oh, it's shocking.
Yeah.
And insanely
Welcome to
frustrating.
business.
Oh, yeah. Other guys, I think I spoke to one large firearms manufacturer, and they had meetings in Europe, and they said, yes, we actually want to go ahead with this. It's going to take us a few years, and the price is going to be X, which is way above what a park can legitimately afford. So we started trying to do them locally, and local guys, again, just try to random price increases just out of greed. So in the end, we said, you know what, let's do this ourselves. And I think, it would have been about September last year, said, okay, I'm going to take this over and just make this. So we have a local company in South Africa, built all the relationships, gave everything to them and said, here you go. And it's a guy that's been working with parks for the last 10 years that we trust implicitly. He's been one of the most amazing companies. He builds all the ballistic equipment, webbing, backpacks, first aid kits. And now he's taken it on and he's producing this. And we have he's even managed to decrease the price from what it was. So now we actually have something to defend the guys out there defending our bloody wildlife.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I may have seen a mock-up of it, but it kind of looks like a tactical assault rifle almost, but it's bolt action, and like you said, you have all these. It's kind of modular.
Correct. We've got iron sights. It has the rail for mounting, and it's intended for use with the red dot. We've got 50 years of science on this. The results are in. Red dots, those sort of optics help accuracy immensely. Target acquisition, speed of firing, everything's improved. But if it breaks, you want to have your backups, and that's why we have the iron sights. We've got the flash suppressor to hide the muzzle flash during the evenings, and if you're firing under low light with night vision, the stock is adjustable. You can change between users, set it to your preferred length. Detachable 10-round magazines, lightweight, it's 3.4 kilos. Everything all together makes this package that can fulfill everything. The Mark I is already in use in CAR at the moment. Zimbabwe, we've got currently shipping out to Malawi, Zambia, Tanzania, Mozambique, a whole range of places. And the clients that are requesting this are saying, some of them are even CAR. And they said, we can get AKs. They were offered AKs, PKMs, belt-fed machine guns. And they said, actually, no, we don't want this. This escalates force and presents an image that we don't want. We have an arrangement with all the different armed groups, the insurrectionists, the rebels and such. We are here for the park. We are not here. We're completely apolitical. We don't care who's in power. We're not here for that. We are solely here for conservation. And people accept that. Now, if they go out armed with AKs and PKMs, then that's going to start presenting a different image and makes them a target.
They start to look like a local militia or something like that versus law enforcement.
Precisely. They sat and said, with our threat context, we are able to best achieve this with a bolt action. It represents the image that we want to portray. It handles a threat that we're facing. This is what we want. So even guys that can get AK-47s are saying, well, let's look at this objectively and what is the best solution for our needs.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Did you ever think you were going to become an inventor when you got into this space?
No, at all. But I think it's just a result of being a disgusting nerd. John, I just collect information everywhere, and I just love bringing it in, researching things. If I've got a question, then I go down this rabbit hole trying to dig into what is the potential solution. I think 2014, one of my best friends and I looked at it. Webbing, the Rangers, you don't need full military webbing. They're not carrying 7 magazines, 2 grenades, night vision. They're not carrying these things. They don't need those things. So if you're giving them ex-military webbing, you got a lot of empty pouches. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got this cheap Chinese crap that looks like some Viet Cong guy was wearing it in the 60s.
Jeez.
So there has to be middle ground. And so my friend at the time worked for a tactical company making equipment. So he gave his time, and with spare materials, we started making prototypes of a basic webbing. And this company was very helpful. We produced 5 different levels, and each time they would produce a dozen different sets. I would send them out to parks for months, get their feedback, then work on the next prototype. And eventually what we got to is the SAP rig, which was originally called the Steiner anti-poaching rig, and we changed it to Sword because that was the company. And now recently, I think we looked at it's about 4,000 units across Africa. It's become the single most common piece of webbing in use in conservation. And all these things we just made and gave to someone else. Like we're here to find a solution.
Yeah.
We found the solution. There you go, make it. Our only request is you don't take the piss. You don't overcharge. You make it accessible to parks. But beyond that, do it.
I think that's the key is really digging, like you said, you're kind of obsessed with the research side, digging in and creating a solution for a problem. Because I think a lot of these companies, it's more about a look or something like that, and it's almost verges on fashion. It's like tactical kind of stuff, and there's some utility to it. But I think unless you're in that specific context, you're not going to know what is needed. And
absolutely,
yeah.
There's there we go. There's the load shedding kicking in. Go South Africa. There's a saying I've often heard. I was what the CEO of one of these organizations, and I think we were talking about drones at the time, and he said, it's a product that's looking for a market. It's not the market that's saying we need a product to fill this gap. And then that ties in with something I heard from another friend saying form follows function. The form should follow what is its intended purpose. What's it there to do? So we've got a lot of people trying to sell a product that's not fit for the market. They're just trying to sell it because that's what they want. Drones, again, a great example. People are very passionate about drones. Does this actually solve the problem that we have? In many cases, no. But they try to massage it into that. So I'll go the other way and say, right, what is the problem and what's the best way to solve this? I think at the end of my time with African Parks was producing standard operating procedures and doctrine. And what I found was there is almost never one set of rules that you can now apply everywhere. You simply can't. So what I produced for African Parks was a collection of best practices. We can't dictate to you what the ideal patrol size should be, or the makeup or the constitution or what equipment you need. All that is dependent upon the site, and it changes so much. What we can say, though, is here's an example of 5 different best practices that have worked. So with these, you can sit in your park, analyze your own context and say, you know what, that one fits my need. I can do that. In the entire manual, the only thing in a small text box that was an SOP were things that don't change, like weapon safety. These are the 4 states of weapon readiness. This is it. That is an SOP. You will follow that. Beyond that, though, what kind of weapon you have is dependent on your context. When you go to incident, when you go to action, these are all dependent on your context.
And is that kind of all written into these guidelines?
Yeah.
Like this, you need to evaluate your situation and here's some guidelines, but ultimately it's going to be specific to your context. Because even with like the IRF and creating a lot of these guidelines for like globally for rangers, I feel like it's always going to be hard to capture everything because every situation is going to be so different, especially if you go to like a Marine Ranger
Yeah,
versus someone in the desert. It's just the context is so different.
that's exactly it. And it's so when I started, 2009, 2010, there was none of this. So I started collecting these best practices and putting it all together. And that's when I met Ruben when we were doing the first guidelines. And it had to be similar to that framework, that guiding framework, that here is a range of things you can do. We can't tell you what to do in your area. You know your area best. Here's a guideline to how to analyze the problem. And then here's some potential solutions. You pick. There's nothing worse than someone who comes parachuting in from out of nowhere and says, oh, you must do this. We had some guys who came into Congo at one point and making recommendations. And they had obviously read a jungle warfare manual. They said, right, everyone should have hammocks. Okay, that's an interesting thought. All right, thank you. Tell me, though, where do we hang these hammocks up? Are you in the jungle? Yeah, triple-tiered jungle. We have trees. The biggest trees to support the weight of a hammock are about 50 meters apart. Everything in between is low growth. It's not even thick as your wrist. So there is nowhere to. So if you want hammocks, you're going to space your patrol out over 500 meters, or you're going to sleep on the ground anyway. So it's an example of taking shit out of manuals and then saying you must do this without the context, without analyzing what the real problem is. One of my favorite examples is people not understanding the nuts and bolts, the realities of things. And I was a pretty mediocre digger in the army. Okay, I'm a grunt. Don't come from anything special. But knowing how things work and just experiencing it. I went to one park at a large meeting there when we were looking at Earth Ranger and the domain awareness system. And this park takes us around where they're going to build the operations center. Now, this is a park that does not struggle for funding. It's one of the smallest but most well-funded parks you can imagine. And they've done amazing work with it. But the level we're talking, this ops room, there's going to be 5 flat screens on the wall here, and the analyst will sit there, and the radio rooms are here, and it's this and that. And it's like Houston in East Africa. And then, right, are there any questions? Yeah. I said, okay, but so where's the toilet? So what do you mean? So, well, there's a brew room. You've got a fantastic rest and recreation area. But where's the toilet? So, well, the toilet's at the barracks. So the barracks are 400 meters away through the bush in Big 5 territory. Do you think your analyst at 3 o'clock in the morning, after he's been downing coffee after coffee to try and stay awake, is he walking 400 meters through the bush? Or do you think he's going around the corner and pissing on the wall? Oh, yeah, actually, yeah, we better put some toilets in. You've got this grand design and great intent, but the actual nuts and bolts of it could use some work.
Yeah, you're not really imagining the lived experience of operating in that situation. Can you talk, since you're kind of talking about people dropping in, we mentioned this a little bit in the beginning, but other organizations coming from other countries, you came from Australia, so you could be one of the guys in this context, but people coming from the outside and maybe applying their techniques and procedures from maybe a special forces background or something of that type, and just how are people doing it wrong, and what's the right way to go about this if someone's coming in and wanting to help out in the African context, at least?
I think it's a great question because it's something we've been seeing over and over again, and it gets a huge amount of publicity because I'd say probably almost half of these efforts, these initiatives, are people that I personally think they're doing it for profile. They're doing it for Instagram photos and for followers, and it's all very tactical, and they're dripping with equipment. And I saw a photo of one guy that someone had analyzed all the equipment he's wearing, and it was about $6,000 worth of equipment he's wearing. The place he was working is a 3-hectare privately owned park that has 6 captive lions.
Are you serious?
I'm not kidding you.
Wow.
Yet the Instagram photos, Jesus, he's single-handedly going to retake Fallujah. It's just out of control.
Well, even thinking about someone like that in one of these parks where the rangers are making, $50 a month or $200 a month, that's ridiculous.
And they're coming in. We had a group come in offering for free to do some first aid training in one of the Congolese parks. And I was kind of against it, but the park manager convinced me and said, they're coming in with equipment, they're going to donate. I think it was a 14-day exercise. They did 2 days of training and spent 12 days camming themselves up and taking photos of each other. And online, and you see those photos, it's very artfully applied camouflage cream, and chest deep in the water with a rifle. Now, mind you, it was illegal for them to touch a weapon. I have a certificate, I have a permit from the Director General of the Conservation Department in Congo allowing me to bear arms. If you don't have that, you can't touch it. So these guys have borrowed them from the rangers who didn't know any better, and they're illegally doing this.
And taking pictures of it.
It's just, what are you here to do? Like, you're here to help yourself or help them. The way I've done it, the way my friends have done it, and the best guys I know, the way Boris did it, you come over and you learn. I started off fixing game fences, living in a tent with 20 local laborers. It was horrendous. But you start that way, you learn. You can't come in. It's like, I said this in an article once. What if a Malawian went to Minnesota and started telling you what to do?
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. You're not going to accept it. So you have these guys come in, and even if it's not just for their own personal aggrandizement, if they now start trying to tell you, oh, you do this and do that, under what context? I'm sorry, but how long have you spent here? How much do you understand of the problem? There's a lot of people have a very, very strong issue with that, and rightfully so. The right way to do it is you come over, honestly, you just volunteer for the first year and you start learning. And the best guys I know over here now have all done it that way. They come over, they volunteer for a year, they build their reputation, they spend the time on the ground understanding the problem. And people know you're not here for the photos, you're not here for the money, you're actually here for the right reasons. And those are the guys that stick, and those are the guys that have the best and biggest impact on conservation.
Yeah, and it's much more of a long-term outlook, which it sounds like some of these people coming in are just, they want the photo for the gram, or just to maybe stroke their ego a little bit and come in somewhere and tell everybody what to do, and then they're gone and leave everyone kind of high and dry.
Well, the most famous one was years ago, like 2013, 2014 in Tanzania. And you've got these big, so we're out here to kill poachers and I'm here to hunt bad guys. And really, they're in one small reserve for a couple of weeks, getting paid $800 a day by Animal Planet, and achieved nothing. It's like, this is disgusting. And the effect they had, people see that and they apply that to the entire industry. Oh, you're all like that because they're the ones promoting it. Everyone else is maintaining a low, very, very quiet profile and not publicizing anything. So you get painted with the same brush as them. They put back efforts in conservation years and achieved absolutely nothing for it. In fact, it was a massive, massive disaster. Those kind of guys, and thankfully we don't get much of it more in here, but SA, you still get it a bit. You get guys coming over, spending a few weeks, taking photos, selfies with guns, pretending they're, I don't know, tears of the sun. It's damaging and it's bloody stupid.
Yeah, and I mean, it probably feeds into people that are using that green militarization argument. It goes right. It feeds right into their.
It feeds into their narrative, but what anyone who's in the industry knows that's not indicative. That's not a reflection of the real state of the industry. Oh, look at these guys, and they're all dressed up in, about to, attack Islamabad. They're like, well, maybe that's the way they're portraying themselves, but they're not actually in the field. They're not even doing anti-poaching. This is more. I got asked to write another article recently on a counter-poaching loadout. And I'm trying to think about this, and I want to make it humorous, of course. So I said, okay, well, there's the 3 C's of counter-poaching equipment. I said there's catastrophic, and that's where a lot of parks were 10 years ago. They've got no equipment. The guys are patrolling in flip-flops and gumboots and no first aid gear. There's nothing. And the next level up, I say, is capable. And that's where a lot of groups have gotten to now. You have an individual first aid equipment for every man. They have a serviceable weapon that they can use to defend themselves. They have sleeping equipment. They have medical equipment that's very capable. It's solid. And the final level I call cosplay. And that's what these guys are doing. They're just, I don't know. There was even a guy I saw a photo on Instagram once. It was almost like the Mandalorian helmet. And I was like, it's an airsoft thing. It cost $50. I'm like, what on earth are you?
He was out in the bush, like posing for pictures.
And it wasn't a joke. It wasn't irony. It was literally, here I am on operations. Like, oh my God.
Wow. Is there a right way? Because I feel like some of these organizations and trying to, hopefully they have good intentions, even though things turn wrong, good intentions aren't enough. But, some of these organizations are trying to provide a way for ex-military to have purpose and kind of connect to this type of work. Do you think there is a way that you can do that and benefit both sides, giving them some way to contribute, but also respecting the situation on the ground locally and actually providing some type of real benefit to the people that they're supporting?
Yeah, I think the question to be asked is, why are you doing this? Why are you here? What is the highest priority you have? And if your priority is to work for conservation and to help the cause, great. If your priority is to deal with PTSD or other issues, then I'd suggest therapy. This job is too important and too dangerous for the guys themselves, the rangers on the ground, to be made a second priority. And it's a horrible, there's no right answer to this, because you want to help these guys as well, but this is not the way to do it. If you're coming out here with the intention to completely help and better a place and to give what you can and serve the cause, fantastic. You're welcome with open arms. But if your intention is other than that, and conservation falls third on the list of priorities, then I'm sorry, get another hobby.
Yeah, you can't be just using it for your own benefit, whether that's helping someone's PTSD or making money or just looking cool on Instagram. So
Yeah, those, like the making money, the Instagram stuff, the personal, okay, that's just terrible, and it should be as far away as humanly possible. The PTSD, we all have, friends that have this and have gone through this. We want to help them, but that's not the way to do it. Not when you're talking about the safety and the well-being of guys on the ground. I'm sorry, that's not the solution.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
Before we continue, here's a clip from Rhino Man the movie.
What's currently happening now is a systematic deletion of rhino.
Just to get the message that rhino was shot somewhere. It's very painful. It's very painful.
Rhino horns are feeding a global crime monster out there.
The field ranger has to make a life or death decision in a single split second.
Rhino Man the movie is now available on most platforms. You were talking about your humor a little bit, and I've seen some of your artwork that you've done. Can you talk about some of your extracurricular activities?
That's a tough one, because a lot of them are done anonymously, but
Well, you don't have to talk specifics, but
well, it is something I did get in a lot of trouble for in the army. What do they say? Idle hands are the devil's plaything. Well, bored grunts is one of the most dangerous things imaginable. So that's just a fun hobby and a way to let off steam a bit. And I've seen, not just myself, there's a lot of other stuff out there, some good little Photoshop pranks and memes. I do quite enjoy it, and then mostly for friends. Usually everyone for their birthdays, I'll do a little card and make a little bit of a joke about it. I think Ruben's one, I think we had a Zoom call, probably similar to what you did with him.
Uh-huh.
And he has this incredibly large headpiece and boom microphone that comes out. Looks like an air traffic controller from the 50s. And so I put him into a World War II photo of a Russian bomber crew.
I've seen that one. He showed it to me.
And it fits
pretty
really
good.
well. Yeah.
I mean, you've gotten pretty proficient with Photoshop, I have to say. I've seen some of the ones you've done with Boris after, I think, that interview I did with him. He sent me some.
Well, that's right. He did that series for on tracking.
Yeah.
That YouTube series was really well put together. It was very impressive.
Yeah, I watched that before I did his interview. It was good stuff.
Well, there's a bit that we can play with here. So, yeah, it's a sign of love.
Yeah.
If you love your friends, then you make fun of them.
Were you always into art growing up? Do you do drawing as well?
No, nothing at all. It's just creativity. I just like having an outlet for that. So whether it's designing something or researching, finding a solution to something, I have an idea, and if I can't get someone else to do it, or if it's not available out there, then I'll make it. And that's pretty much the way. Like, made this table. That's just like being creative about things.
Just that creative process, inventing things.
Jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah, that's a good place to be. I mean, so kind of looking at someone that's thinking of going into the ranger space, maybe just a local South African or African that's considering doing this type of work. What would you tell them if you're just speaking directly to them? The opportunities or also the sacrifices that they might have to make.
Well, I get asked that question a lot, actually. A lot of guys want to come over. Another friend did it recently last year. First thing I'd say is ignore the pessimism. It was an interesting article a couple of years ago talking about less and less people studying conservation at university, simply because the news is so bad. We're constantly being told about mass extinctions and just the difficulties that we're facing, and so less and less people are doing it. And I would tell people that, it's bloody difficult. There's no money. It's a hard life. There's no leave. You're in the park in the middle of nowhere, utterly isolated. It's very dangerous, but it's worth it. The quality of life that you get is incomparable to almost anything else you can do. A lot of guys, you can leave and go back to the defense sector and contracting, and you'd make 10 times the money. But where's the value, the quality of life that you're getting out of it? So guys coming in, I'd say people, even South Africa is a good example because a lot of the younger generation, no one has military service anymore. So, and they can't really join the military. They can't join the army. They're not sure where to get these skills. So a lot of guys do private anti-poaching courses, which are good. Every little bit helps. But my biggest advice is no one's going to take it on face value. Get to a place, volunteer. You need to build your reputation. There are so many people wanting to come into what is a very small space. There's not that much place out there. And think about it in a local context as well. You're going to come in here. Why should they pay you more than they're paying anyone else? That's just, that's almost the definition of unfair. So get in there, accept that there's no money. It'll take years to build a reputation. And I've known a lot of guys that have done it that way. And now they move on and they're being promoted and they're rising in their careers and they're doing really great stuff. That initial period, that first couple of years, you just have to knuckle down and just bloody do it. There's no fast track.
Yeah, it's always interesting because I feel like there's so many parallels between kind of a creative career and the conservation career. Because often there can be I guess with the creative side, there can be, once you get to a certain level, the rewards can be pretty substantial in terms of finances, but kind of making your way into that space a lot of times is very similar. You have to volunteer your time. No one's going to just let you pay you to direct something, or for example, you have to kind of pay your dues and work your way up. A lot of it's volunteering. You're not making anything to start, and you have to basically build those skills on your own and find ways to do that training or education and kind of make your own path.
That's exactly it. You occasionally run into guys in a park, like you run into a tourist, you meet them at lunch or something, and they go, "Oh, you're so lucky to have this job." I'm like, yeah, because I checked in my box of crackers in the morning and found this job. It was
Exactly.
it was a surprise. Like not like I've been shot at, bilharzia, malaria, dysentery, lost half my body weight. Like all these trials you've gone through to get to this stage. Not like that ever happened. No, I just won this job all of a sudden.
Sleepless nights wondering if you just ruined your entire life by making this choice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but everything's better in hindsight, isn't it? You never really, thankfully, remember the hard parts too much. You always downplay it in your own mind.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what you said speaks to maybe someone coming from outside of the country, but what about like local Black South Africans, for example, that are considering becoming a ranger? What would you tell them as advice going into that space if they're considering it as a job?
I'll say absolutely. That's the qualities that you can, what would I say? The benefits that can accrue from the job are phenomenal. It's as well paid as most other jobs around. It is dangerous, but if you apply your training, then yeah, it's a numbers game. The better trained and more disciplined and more professional you are, then the better your chances. It's difficult, it's dangerous, but again, quality of life. You're actually doing something for a cause, something that your children and their children will be able to benefit from in generations to come.
And you mentioned this just a minute ago, but looking at this space, there can be a lot of hopelessness. So what do you do to keep yourself motivated to keep going?
Oh, geez, yeah. That's probably one of the biggest things that's gotten me, and the most difficult thing I find is dealing with a lot of the bullshit, the lies, the misrepresentations. You see guys, oh, we're out there saving the world, and no, you're not. You're paying yourself a massive wage. And I've seen this happen multiple times, yet the guys have nothing. It's so difficult, and there's people out there, the egos in this space are sometimes out of control. People think they're the savior of the world, and they're promoting themselves constantly. That gets really difficult to see. Most you can try and do is shrug it off. And I think it's, that saying, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. There are a relatively few amount of dickheads out there. There's a relatively few amount, but they consume a lot of energy. They get the attention. You're like, God, these guys. So it just helps to think of the good guys. And you'll be sitting around with mates and we'll just be having a beer and chatting, and you'll hear about something bad, but more often than not, you say, oh, hey, you've heard about what so-and-so is up to over here. Like, oh, yeah, such a good guy. And oh, this person was like, you talk the good stuff, and that's what you want to concentrate on. There's not enough of it. There should always be more. But if you think about it, you think, right, get out there. Like, in my time, I've been incredibly fortunate to be in projects and parks and organizations that are so busy doing the work, they have zero profile. No one's ever heard of them. They're existing hand to mouth. They're paying themselves $100 a year. Like they're doing everything for the cause. I met an American couple that had moved to the Ituri forest in Congo in the mid 70s. They've been there their entire life, 50 years in the jungle. They helped set up a national park, have it gazetted, supported and requested by the local communities, but no one's ever heard of them. So projects like that are so successful and so amazing and inspiring that you try and concentrate on those ones instead.
Yeah, it's always, I feel like as soon as, I don't know, the more you've spent time in this space, I feel like you can quickly identify the people that are kind of just in it for the image, you know? And it is sad because I feel like because often they're so vocal and, you know, putting themselves out there so much, they do attract a lot of attention and dollars as well. And the people that are kind of have their heads down doing the work, they almost need someone to come in and highlight what they're doing so that
Yeah.
people can support them because they're too busy, and they're also, a lot of them are just very humble as well.
Yeah. Well, and then you've got the middle ground in between those two, where you've got guys who personally, how did I put it before? I said, yeah, this guy, I'm not going to go on a 3-day bromantic fishing expedition with him and, just drink. No, we're never going to be that close friends, but we can work together.
Yeah.
You can find that middle ground. And there are guys who do have massive egos and they do promote themselves. But at the same token, they're also doing really, really great work. So,
Yeah, you can forgive it a little bit if
Yeah,
they're actually making things happen and
yeah,
doing-
exactly. You've got to, okay, overall, is this good or bad? Yeah, they're actually doing good work. I don't like how he's doing it. Personally, I'm against that. It's taken me forever to even try and develop some sort of public profile, and I'm always very strongly resistant of it. And there's guys who do it too well. But
Mhm.
what's the end result? Are they doing good work? Yeah. Okay. Well, good on them.
Do you have any other advice for people just getting into the conservation space in general, and trying to find ways that they can help support?
Yeah. I think what I've said earlier, that realistic expectations, understanding what it is and what it isn't. You're not going to be out there. You come over here and volunteer. You're not going to be out on ops. It's not Tears of the Sun or Blood Diamond or anything else. You're not running around in a Hollywood movie. 99% of the time, and it's like being in the military itself, 99% of the time is boredom. You're standing by, you're training, you're getting ready for the next thing, you're coming back from an operation, you're debriefing, cleaning your equipment. It's routine and it's monotony a lot of the time. You need to understand that. If you come into this with realistic expectations that you're not going to be on operations, and maybe a decade down the line, you're not going to be running around with a gun, you're not going to be doing this stuff, the majority of your time is going to be spent in monotony and organization and basically sticking to standards and trying to enhance that. That's where you get the success from. I think if people come into that with that understanding, then yeah, you can actually have a fantastic life. You can have a great time. You'll enjoy yourself. You'll be proud of what you've done, and people will be proud to know you. But coming over with less realistic expectations, you're going to cause trouble. You're going to end up leaving disappointed and in tears.
Yeah, you'll crash and burn pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, that is a big one, is in terms of this space, is I think there's just so many people that are really driven by the purpose side of it. And you don't see that in a lot of industries. You know, a lot of people are just, they're in it for the job, the financial rewards, whatever it may be. But I think because of the limitations of conservation in some respects, most of the people that end up sticking it out are doing it for the right reasons, I think. And so I've just met so many amazing people in this space overall. And that was the first thing when I left South Africa after my first trip here to shoot for the film. You know, the wildlife and seeing Kruger Park was amazing, but what stuck with me were the people and just how inspirational they were. And I feel like they just gave off a certain aura that you don't see that often in everyday. And I think that a big part of that is just the love for that work and the people around them, because everyone has to rely on each other so much.
Yeah, you need a huge amount of inner strength
Mm.
to deal with all the setbacks and the disappointments and when things don't go your way, and most often they probably bloody won't. You've got to have that inner strength just to take another step and another step and another step, and just hope that it will get better. take every little win you can. That's probably biggest piece of advice. Celebrate those little wins. Take them, because they don't come along often. And there's more than enough kicks that you're going to take, that you have to be able to take the good stuff, and you have to recognize it for what it is and just keep on going. That's every setback, you just have to keep on going.
I mean, I think that's common to any big project that someone takes on, right? Or it could be career move or anything like that. I mean, do you have any additional advice for someone that's, you know, kind of in the throes of the struggle to get somewhere, maybe kind of losing faith in themselves or just doubting that they're doing the right thing? I mean, how do you get through those times when, I think when you start out, you have this vision of something that can be achieved on the other end, but along the way, you kind of take a lot of hits and might be at that low point where you're like, is it worth pushing through?
But to reiterate, my biggest piece of advice would be just celebrating those small wins. Give yourself these small bite-sized chunks that you can break off one by one. That patrol in Congo, I couldn't even lift my own backpack. I was absolutely broken. About 47 kilos. I was just at the end. And I said, you know what? I'm going to walk to this next tree. And that's where I'm going to stop, and that's where I'm going to have a break. And then you get to that tree, and then you go, just one more. Let me go a little bit more. Let me do a little bit more. And just little by little by little. And then I think it took, there wasn't really no other option then, because it was 3 days by canoe and we had no contact back. And it's another 6 days to reach the road to the north. If you collapse, if you fall down, there is no one to get you out. There is no helicopter. There's no road. There's nothing. You are going to die there. So one more step, just one more tree, one more break, just one more thing. And then days later, then you're out on the road to Jesus, I actually made it. So anything of that level, anything difficulty getting through, and it's just that one step. And you know what? Even if it fails now, I still made it this far. I still took a few extra steps than I thought I could. So yeah, those little wins, those extra steps, just one more every time.
Yeah, it is amazing how just focusing on that next little step, because that's all it is a series of those built up over time, can get you through. Because when you're in that overwhelmed state, to think of all the stuff in between now and the end will just put you down even further. So yeah, I feel like I've had that experience.
Well, it's an appropriate saying I heard in one village there. How do you eat an elephant? Piece by piece.
Yeah, exactly.
So, maybe we can pick another one, but I get what you're saying.
Do you have anyone that's influenced you over these years that you kind of have looked up to and that has given you inspiration to move forward?
Yeah, I've been really fortunate. The first guy that I really got into this was a fellow called Dup Maritz, who used to be Sergeant Major of the Recce's. Ruben knows him well, South African Special Forces. And he's a giant, both physically and in his influence. And he was the guy that gave this young dude out from Oz a chance and helped me volunteer and put me into places. And I learned a huge amount from him. And just his attitude, I never saw him angry. I never saw him upset. I never saw him sad. He was always positive, always fighting through whatever happened. He was an incredible guy, still is. Not was. I've been very fortunate. There's one guy in particular that for the last 10 years has been a very strong mentor to me. About 5 years ago, I started a master's degree and I never finished high school. So never graduated school, never got a bachelor's degree, went straight into a master's, and it did my head in. It was a hell of a learning curve. I was really, really drowning. And this guy just kept encouraging me, pushing me through. He's always been there with advice, with introductions, with help, just as a stabilizing, influencing figure. And at my wedding last year, he stood up and spoke, and the guests were beyond impressed. And I think half the guests were actually in tears with what he had to say. And at that same moment, the best man at my wedding was my best friend who helped me out with the wedding. And he as well, just their attitudes and how they deal with problems has been a huge source of confidence and inspiration. It's been a big help. No matter how bad and down I feel, I know that what would they do? What would they do? They'd just keep on fighting. So, yeah.
Yeah, the more of those people you can surround yourself with, the better. Because I feel like you really are the average of the people you spend the most time with. And
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. And I've had to step away from some people in my life, and that's always difficult. And try and identify like what character traits do I want myself, and what kind of a person do I want to be, and surround yourself with people like that. And yes, I'm fortunate to know some incredible people. I just have to stop myself swearing there. I'm getting really worked up by this. I'm fortunate to know so many great people. Yeah, it's been a big help.
Yeah, that's amazing. And yeah, I feel a similar thing in my life with just through this project, honestly, just meeting so many incredible people, and it really does encourage you to keep going further. And yeah, and there's no substitute for those real relationships, but I think for me, that's what I love about these types of podcasts is you can listen to other people's stories and learn from them and be inspired by them as well as an example. So it's kind of the beauty of some of the good side of all this technology. You know, sometimes the social media lends to people jumping into the bush and taking pictures, but but yeah, you can learn so much from other people's stories through these types of conversations.
And there are so many good people out there. Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up with the dickheads and the selfie mongers and the Instagram egotists. It's really easy to get caught up in that. But there are so many good people out there, and that's what's worth concentrating on. People have given their entire lives, struggled for decades, and they're still there. No one's ever heard of them. No one probably ever will. But they're out there and they're making that difference. And that's what we got to concentrate on.
I guess a final question, unless there's anything else you want to add. You know, what's kind of your vision for the future for yourself and for conservation and the projects you're working on, maybe rangers specifically? You know, what do you hope to see happen in the coming years?
Looking back, which helps me now so where's this been going all this time? And I see it as the professionalization of conservation law enforcement. Everything's been improving year by year by year. It's getting better and better and better. And I see that carrying on in the future as well. I see rangers being respected and acknowledged more, being helped more. I see their lives in terms of career progression, in terms of health, status, family. I think in every way possible they're being helped more and advancing more. I'd like to see the profession itself become a desired thing, not just for the job, not just for the cash, but people are rangers themselves. Say, I want to be a ranger. That's not just a fallback. If they didn't get into the police, I'll go here instead. I see that's where it's going. And a lot of my work currently is helping either organizations or governments as well. How do we structure and better improve? What are we doing here? Been helping out one government recently with restructuring their entire wildlife department. What does the ideal structure look like? What sort of positions and benefits and duties and responsibility? What are all these things? What should they ideally be? So I've made analysis of all different wildlife legislations in Africa, put those together, different comparisons. Here's what you can do to make the life of the guy on the ground better. And I'd love to continue that and see that improving.
I kind of lied. That's another question. What do you think we lose if we lose the boots on the ground, the rangers on the front line?
We lose more than I think can even be explained. And there's short-term effects, long-term effects. We lose those boots on the ground. We lose those animals. We lose those animals. We also lose the habitat. That becomes farming land, grazing land, and habitational. And just it gets chopped down for firewood. It becomes barren. And again, with the science is out there for decades. The results are in. With that land gone, we've now lost our water sources. We're losing biodiversity. We're possibly even increasing zoonotic diseases. The long-term effects are absolutely horrendous. I think a great example of one of the most inspiring projects that I've ever come across is Virunga National Park. What they've done there under Emmanuel Demerode has created these hydroelectric plants that provide subsidized electricity to the entire communities around. Last time I was there, they were connecting the cable to supply to Goma. They have brought in the middle of the jungle of a war-torn district that still has a dozen different militias running around it, attacking its rangers. They lost 200 men killed by militias in the last decade. And yet they've been able to do this. And the plan goes even further than this. That subsidized electricity will then leads to the creation of an economic zone where factories can be built using those materials. They've got the government to agree on an economic zone, a tariff-free zone, to encourage those businesses in, and they in turn will provide the jobs that will demobilize the militias in the region. This is it's beyond inspirational. It's absolutely incredible. And all of this is possible because of the watershed that the Virungas holds, which funds the electricity, feeds the electricity, which then funds and creates everything else. If the park's gone, the water's gone, which means the electricity's gone and the jobs are gone. You could not have a better example where it's all directly linked.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know the details of all that situation, but I feel like in a lot of contexts where maybe some of the governments aren't doing what they need to do and aren't supplying the funds or the resources, I think that's one of the incredible things to see is all these NGOs and different organizations coming together to kind of fill those gaps in when it works well, working together with each other and with the local communities to really make a difference.
It's like a unity of effort.
Mm-hmm.
When you get absolutely everyone involved on it, it's phenomenal. I think there's one example in Namibia where it's one of the best cases of cooperation I think I've ever seen. You've got the Blue Rhino Task Team, which is a counter-trafficking organization that has now brought in police, special forces, wildlife department, customs, taxation department, financial intelligence, everyone working together in a manner that I have not seen anywhere else. Their ability to crack down on the trafficking of contraband and wildlife goods is without parallel. It's absolutely phenomenal. I often say I would love to take people from various countries, not naming any in particular, but take them to Namibia for a 2-week period and say, see how these guys have done it. Watch how they cooperate and the support that they give each other. It's phenomenal. And when that happens, when there's that unity of effort, anything's possible.
That's pretty incredible. Well, Kurt, is there anything else you want to leave us with before we wrap this up?
No, I think, everything that we've talked about so far, there's so much media out there around this subject, but so much of it is misleading and misguiding. I think looking at it with realistic expectations, I think manage to sift through what photos and what images are actually real versus what's being presented because someone has a certain desire to present themselves in a certain way. The reality is often very different, but it is out there and it's easy to find. If people want to help, understand what the reality is, and it's not what you see out there. It's a lot more dangerous and it's a lot more boring at times. But my God, it's bloody necessary. So,
yeah. Well, thank you, Kurt. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this and also just all the years of effort you put into this cause and supporting the rangers and conservation on a whole. It's pretty incredible and inspiring. And yeah, I'm excited for people to hear this episode.
Thanks very much, John. Good to see you.
Cheers. Thank you for listening to the Rhino Man podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you're excited to see the film succeed, please subscribe, like, rate, and review our podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Then follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Rhino Man the Movie. More details about Rhino Man, the social impact campaign, and future screenings are at rhinomanthemovie.org. To learn more about the Global Conservation Corps and their work, visit globalconservationcorps.org. Sign up for the newsletter and follow GCC on all of the social platforms. If you like this podcast, make sure to subscribe to and catch up on GCC's Voices of Nature podcast, where Bob Ludke interviews a wide range of people who have dedicated their lives to making a difference in conservation. A special thanks goes out to Simone Wilson for the music for this podcast. He is a brilliant composer for Rhino Man the Movie. Learn more about his work at simonewilsonmusic.com. Until next time, I'm John Jerko, and this is the Rhino Man Podcast.